Our second public meeting to discuss the 2020 water and wastewater rate study. And in this meeting, we're going to talk about the actual recommendations of the study. I'm Terry Picars, Municipal Utilities Director for the City of Tempe. And with me today is Tara Ford, Deputy Municipal Utilities Director over our Water Utilities Division. And also on the line, we've got other staff, including Stephen White, Laura Keifetz, and they're facilitating the meeting and the chat questions and answers, and we encourage your use of the chat feature as we move through the meeting, but we'll have an opportunity also at the end to answer any questions we can. And we'll talk about some other surveys, comment cards, and other things we'd encourage you to take advantage of as we move through this process. As I mentioned, Tara and I are here today to present the recommendations of our 2020 water and wastewater rate study. The city conducts cost of service or rate studies every 2 years with the assistance of a financial services consulting firm. Stantec is our consultant for this year's rate study and has been working with the city in conducting similar studies for our enterprise funds since 2015. The rate study is conducted in accordance with principles and methodologies established by the American Water Works Association, which is water industry standard in the United States, with a cost-based allocation methodology and development of rates and charges that are just and reasonable per state law and legally defensible. We are here today seeking your feedback following presentation of the rate study recommendations to the Tempe City Council last week. At the request of Council, we are here to gather additional public feedback on proposed rate changes, which we will communicate to the City Council for consideration prior to their formal policy approval. And again, we'd like to encourage your participation in this process by completing a short survey you can find actually on the rate study webpage or on Tempe Forum. I believe Laura or Steve, we're going to try to put that in the notes or comments section, chat section of the WebEx, so you can find that there as well. Okay. The 2020 water and wastewater rate study aligns with and supports these City Council strategic priorities. High quality, reliable, secure, and cost-effective water services provide the essential foundation for quality of life, economic growth, and job creation in our community. With the support of City Council and the community, we will continue executing the city's water management strategy and providing the high level of service our customers have come to expect. As a starting point for the rate study process to provide direction to our consultant, certain assumptions were necessary regarding previous council policy guidance. The cost-based approach has been used in previous rate studies and was used again this year as it is industry best practice. Advanced metering infrastructure, or AMI data, provides an accurate and precise understanding of customer use, demand characteristics, and the true cost of service by customer classification. It has been the consensus of Council that we continue our water conservation and water efficiency efforts. We have a robust program of outreach, education, and support that provides significant resources to the community. During the last rate study in 2017, Council adopted a 50% cost recovery rate structure for flood irrigation customers, which was the first rate increase for flood irrigation since 2005. This guidance was followed again this year. There are several components to a comprehensive water and wastewater rate study, starting with the utilities revenue requirements. The utilities revenue requirements represent the total amount of money a utility must collect from customers to pay all costs of providing the service. This is determined by identifying all current and estimated future operations and maintenance and capital costs over a 10-year period. This process ensures that the utility will have enough revenue to fund services and meet its reserve fund balance policy. Once revenue requirements are determined, the next step in the process is proportional cost allocation. Cost allocation is the process by which costs are assigned proportionally to each respective customer class based on their respective water demand characteristics. This is achieved by reviewing all customer classifications' water demand characteristics, including historical customer class water usage and peaking characteristics, along with emerging demographic and conservation trends to determine the true cost of providing service to each customer class. Once the utility's revenue requirements have been determined and costs have been allocated proportionally by customer, the next step in the process is rate design. Rate design is the development of the most appropriate rate structure to satisfy an organization's strategic and operational goals. Objectives can range from promoting water efficiency and conservation to minimizing customer affordability concerns to promoting economic development. Rate design also includes an analysis of the impact of proposed rate adjustments or rate structure changes on utility customers. This analysis includes seeking a feedback from city leadership, city council, and the community and making adjustments where appropriate. The ultimate success of any rate study is largely dependent on communication. Communication throughout this process is key to ensuring utility customer involvement and understanding by all involved of the rate study process and data, the potential need for adjustments, national trends and council priorities, etc. Active stakeholder participation is an effective way of involving parties representative of the community served and the respective customer classes, receiving input and ensuring transparency, and is vital to the comprehensive rate study process. I'll now turn it over to Tara to discuss our customer outreach and community engagement efforts.
Great, thank you, Terry. We engage our customers in a number of different ways. In addition to our other outreach and engagement efforts, such as public webinars, the rate study webpage, and presentations to various commissions, this year we formed a community stakeholder group to participate in this process. The community stakeholder group was made up of 10 unique water customers representing each of the respective customer classes: low-income customers, neighborhood associations, business and industry, community organizations, and business organizations. 4 working sessions were held with stakeholder group, city staff, and our financial consultant to review, discuss, and receive input on the various components of the rate study process, as well as the study recommendations. The first of 2 virtual webinars was held in June and available to all members of the public. We conduct extensive outreach year-round to all water customers. In 2020, we added direct calls to large volume residential customers, or LVRCs, not yet registered in WaterSmart, to our overall customer outreach strategy. Of the 3,346 LVRCs, we directly called all of the 2,519 who had phone numbers associated with their water accounts and that had not yet registered for WaterSmart. This outreach effort resulted in 463 additional WaterSmart registrations. This year to date, all LVRCs have received at least one form of outreach regarding Tempe's water conservation programs, with many having been contacted by numerous means. Of these LVRCs, 62 have enrolled in the Water Efficiency Certification Pilot Program, or WEC. The WEC program provides the opportunity for LVRCs to receive a rate incentive, being charged the Tier 4 rate for Tier 5 water usage for water efficiency efforts on part of the customer. The main reason residents sign up for WEC are to save money and water. Some residents are more interested in the consult itself rather than joining the WEC program in order to learn how to conserve water and save money on the utility bill. Overall, the residents that have enrolled in the WEC pilot program are happy with it. The WEC pilot program concludes in March of 2021. Staff will compile results from the pilot program and present to council for their evaluation. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Terry.
Okay, thanks, Tara. Each customer classification has different water demand characteristics and thus places different demands and costs on our system. AMI data has provided great insight into customer water use and allows for very precise and accurate proportional cost allocation based on actual water usage down to the hourly maximum water demand. This graph indicates customer maximum day water demands for 2019, indicated as a ratio or a peaking factor to average day demand across the respective customer classifications. Utility costs are significantly impacted by peak demands on the water system, since the water system is designed, built, operated, and maintained to meet these peak water demands at all times. Water mains, booster pump stations, and storage tanks, for example, are sized to meet these specific customer water demands when they occur. This is why peak demands are a significant factor in cost of service calculations in our rate study and why we recover costs proportionally from the customer classes creating these peak demands. Proportional cost allocation means that customer charges and rates are based on the cost to satisfy the respective customer's water demand characteristics relative to average day demand, maximum day demand, and peak hour demand. Customers with higher average day, maximum day, and peak hour demands are assigned higher charges, while customers with lower average day, maximum day, and peak hour demands are assigned lower charges. This is the cost-based approach to proportional utility cost allocation. Taking a look at peak hour water demand for the same period, you can see the even greater demand variability our system experiences. This graph further illustrates the large variation in peak water demand across the respective customer classes. We use maximum day and peak hour AMI data to determine each customer class's added capacity, maximum hour, and peak day demand to proportionally allocate the costs associated with providing that level of service. With AMI data, instead of just 12 data points annually for each customer that we had previously, we now have 8,760 data points annually for each customer. This precise data results in fewer assumptions. Customer demand characteristics and peaking information results in a very accurate proportional cost allocation. AMI data clearly and accurately depicts the average day demand, maximum day demand, and peak hour demand for each customer class. This graph shows the water demands our system must be able to meet at all times, even if they occur only 1 hour of the day or only 1 day of the year. For example, the single-family residential customer classification peak hour water demand can reach almost 12 times the average day water demand. Again, the water system is designed, built, operated, and maintained to meet these peak water demands at all times. The rate study recommends a levelized revenue increase of 5.5% per year over the next 10 years to collect sufficient revenue to fund services and meet the minimum reserve fund balance policy. While the rate study recommends increases annually over the next 10 years, we will be coming back to Council to adopt a single revenue increase and will review revenue requirements and update Council each year thereafter. There's no revenue increase required for the wastewater utility at this time. The rate model projects the revenue increase needed for wastewater beginning in 2023. The flood irrigation program is currently projected to recover less than 50% of the cost to operate the system in fiscal year 2021. The rate study recommends a 9.7% revenue increase to maintain the current council policy of 50% recovery of total operating costs. This graph summarizes the cost of service analysis results compared to current revenue. While the overall system requires 5.5% more revenue, class-specific changes can be higher or lower depending on the cost of service and current revenue remittance. Most changes are due to peaking characteristics, multifamily being over-recovered and landscape being under-recovered, for example, based on AMI data. Water service rates are made up of two components, a fixed monthly service charge and a monthly metered water volume charge. This table provides a listing of the fixed monthly service charges we charge customers based on meter size. Fixed monthly service charges recover costs associated with administrative and customer service functions, including billing, metering, meter reading, and customer service, plus a portion of the average day or base system capacity cost. The portion of the average day cost charged is scaled by meter size and calculated using the most recent 3-year average of monthly water use. Leveraging AMI data to update customer usage characteristics and looking at a 3-year average of water use across all customer classifications, this year's rate study recommends updating fixed monthly service charges to recalibrate the proportion of revenue recovered from fixed costs from the respective meter size customers and to increase the overall portion of cost recovery from this revenue source. Monthly service charges were last updated in January 2014. At that time, revenue from monthly service charges represented 23% of the water utility's total revenue. Since then, 2 monthly metered water volume rate increases have been adopted without coinciding adjustment to monthly service charges. As a result, revenue from monthly service charges has fallen to 19% of the water utility's total revenue. Industry standard is 20 to 30% of revenue from fixed costs. Revenue from fixed costs assist in stabilizing the utilities revenue stream, and lower levels of fixed cost recovery can potentially impact bond ratings. The recommended overall increase in monthly service charges would result in 22% of the utilities revenue being recovered from these fixed costs. Monthly metered water volume charges for other customer classifications are calculated by taking the total revenue requirement, subtracting the fixed cost recovery, and then dividing by metered water volume each month. Uniform rates are common in customer classes with customer-specific demand profiles. For the single-family residential customer class, the rate study recommends no changes to tier sizing based on the cost allocation analysis. The cost-based approach to proportional cost allocation, average day, maximum day, and peak hour, is utilized to determine monthly metered water volume charges per tier. It's important to note that tier pricing is applied only to the billable units of water consumed within the respective tier. Each customer pays the same amount for the billable units of water they use within each respective tier. For example, a customer using 20,000 gallons of water in a month would pay $1.84 per 1,000 gallons in Tier 1, $2.83 per 1,000 gallons in Tier 2, $3.89 per 1,000 gallons in Tier 3, etc. These graphs depict average volume customer and large volume customer bill impacts. The total percent change in the customer's bill is impacted by both the change in the fixed monthly service charge and the change in the monthly metered water volume charge. On the left, the 5/8 inch meter with 10,000 gallons of water used is what we consider a typical customer. And on the right, with the 1-inch meter, 50,000 gallons of water is what we consider a large volume residential customer. These graphs provide a comparison of Tempe's current and proposed average monthly water bills to other valley communities. Currently, and even with the proposed increase, Tempe's average monthly water bills are either below or at the average by comparison. And again, it's looking at these two different types of water customer, one being the typical and one being the large volume. Flood irrigation is a distinct service that provides irrigation water to 900 private customers and 16 Tempe parks. The flood irrigation program is currently projected to recover under half of the cost to operate the system in fiscal year 2021. The rate study recommends a revenue increase to maintain the current council policy of 50% recovery of total operating costs as depicted in the table. The bar graph depicts the semi-annual bill impact of maintaining the current council policy of 50% recovery of total operating costs for two customers with different lot sizes. The semi-annual impact to these two customers is approximately $27 and $54 respectively. An important perspective to have when considering the provision of water services is an understanding that costs can vary significantly, not only locally, but across the region and throughout the nation. This is a snapshot comparison put together by an industry group, Circle of Blue, where they collected water and wastewater cost information from cities and utilities across the country. We asked our consultant to add Tempe to this map for comparison purposes. The key takeaway is that unlike a lot of other communities across the country that are struggling with infrastructure issues like Seattle and Atlanta, or water resources constraints and restrictions such as back east and in California and Texas, it's important to keep in mind that the desert Southwest is generally one of the lower cost regions for water and wastewater services across the country. What all of these communities have in common, including ours, are the challenges associated with aging infrastructure, increasing regulatory requirements, operational cost inflation, and changes in customer use behaviors, causing significant upward pressure on rates and to be able to continue to provide a high level of service in the face of those pressures. Although the monthly prices for the cities listed are from a survey completed in 2015, Tempe's $60 is current. The survey is for a family of 4 using 100 gallons of water per person per day, or about 12,000 gallons of water per month. So in summary, the 2020 water and wastewater rate study is recommending a 5.5% annual water revenue increase, adjustment of the proportional cost recovery for each customer classification, adjustment of monthly service charges to increase fixed cost recovery from this source and again adjust to the proportional cost allocation, a 9.7% flood irrigation revenue increase, which will maintain the 50% cost recovery policy, and no change to the wastewater revenue at this time. The rate study process and subsequent recommendations relative to revenue adjustments are based on the objectives of ensuring that the utility collects sufficient revenue to fund services and meet the minimum reserve fund balance policy, which is the amount equal to 25% of the annual operating revenue plus 2% of the gross book value of assets. Utility systems have little margin for failure and are expected to provide uninterrupted service 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Many utility assets are located in hard-to-reach places, such as below ground and intermingled with other assets within easements. Utility assets are also very complex and expensive to repair or replace. Reserve funds for utility systems set aside resources for a specific cash flow requirement, financial need, project, task, or legal covenant. Reserves can play a significant role in addressing current and future challenges facing the utility, such as demand volatility, water supply costs, large capital requirements, and potential liabilities from system failures associated with aged infrastructure. Maintaining adequate operating reserves enhances the utility's ability to manage potential risks, provides a means to absorb fluctuations in revenue, and the ability to meet working capital needs. Operating reserves are also important when facing fiscal emergencies that can result from emergency repairs, droughts, natural disasters, and unforeseen economic influences. Staff is requesting council direction on the recommended revenue increase. Given current economic uncertainties amid the COVID-19 pandemic, we wanted to provide council with a view of what a delayed implementation of the recommended revenue increase would look like. This graph provides a visual representation of the impacts to the reserve fund balance if the recommended revenue increases are adopted but their implementation is delayed. A levelized annual revenue increase of 5.5% starting in January 21 would result in the utility meeting forecasted expenses and staying at or above the minimum reserve fund balance policy over the 10-year period. Delayed implementation would result in a more rapid drawdown of the reserve fund balance and may necessitate future revenue adjustments greater than the 5.5% recommended. Although a delay in implementing the recommended revenue adjustment may not seem significant, the compounding effect on revenue year over year has an impact on and diminishes the reserve fund balance. While temporary postponement of the recommended revenue increase will result in an accelerated drawdown or spending of the utility's reserve fund balance and could result in a higher future rate increases, it may be both prudent and appropriate to draw upon the utility's rainy day fund at this time and not add further financial pressure to our customers. This graph indicates the estimated percent of revenue increase required to stay at or above the utility's minimum reserve fund balance policy should the recommended 5.5% levelized revenue increase be postponed until after January 1st, 2021. We included this graph only as a visual indication of what the impact of a delayed implementation may look like. The rate study recommends a levelized 5.5% revenue increase, and that's what we're providing for consideration. The graph is just for illustration purposes, should the will of the council be to decide something other than what's being recommended in the rate study. Our water utility is currently in a favorable financial position due to our reserve fund balance, which can be utilized to dampen dramatic rate increases and thereby not overly impact customers. This strategy of reserve fund balance utilization or drawdown was included in this year's rate study and is reflected in the recommendations. This graph provides a representation of water and wastewater revenue increases over the last 18 years. It's not uncommon to experience the need for revenue increases following years where at least nominal rate increases were not adopted. Many communities employ a strategy implementing measured, consistent revenue increases over time instead of postponing or skipping annual revenue increases as a way of avoiding rate spiking. It's important to remember that Water and wastewater utilities face generally steeper increases in costs than we see in overall inflation. Typical consumer price index inflation is about 3% per year range. Water and wastewater cost increases have typically been in the 4 to 7% per year range, which results in potential rate impacts in the near and long term. As mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we're here this afternoon seeking your input. The 2020 Water and Wastewater Rate Study is recommending annual levelized 5.5% water revenue increases beginning in January 2021. Mayor Woods and the Tempe City Council value and would appreciate your input as they consider adoption of the rate study recommendations for 2021 and decide whether to implement the recommendations in January or postpone implementation to a later date. If approved, Council would be adopting a water revenue increase of 5.5% beginning in 2021 only. Future recommended revenue adjustments would have to be approved and adopted by Council as well. Implementation of the recommended revenue increase beginning in January 2021 as recommended will ensure that the water utility collects sufficient revenue to fund services and maintain the utility's minimum reserve fund balance. Postponing implementation beyond January 2021 will result in the likelihood of a revenue increase greater than 5.5% required in the future and more rapid drawdown of the utility's reserve fund balance over the 10-year projection period. City Council would appreciate your feedback on your preference to adopt the revenue increase of 5.5% beginning in January 2021 as recommended, or to postpone it to a later date. And again, the survey is available on the rate study webpage and the Tempe forum, and we very much appreciate your participation in that process. Our next steps include this second public meeting today, presentation to the Neighborhood Advisory Commission on September 30th, and a public hearing and council consideration of rate adoption on December 3rd. Comment cards are available now, and public comment period will continue until October 2nd. And with that, we will answer any questions we can. Thank you.
Terry, we have a couple in the chat. I'm going to read one from Miriam right now, and then I'm going to unmute David, who wants to ask his live, I believe. Miriam asks, I would like to know how multifamily district zoning is impacting single-family residents.
I'm not sure exactly what that question, what the question is asking, except for I can say that when it comes to the multifamily customer class, we've seen some adjustment in the numbers of multifamily customers since the last rate study was conducted, which made for a shift in numbers of customers within the multifamily class, but also within the single family class. But as we saw earlier in the presentation, as the analysis was conducted and cost allocation, the proportional cost allocation was determined, we actually saw a slightly reduced recommendation in multifamily as they were being somewhat over-recovered in terms of the way the model results turned out. In other words, the cost to provide the water service to that particular customer class based on their peaking information, their customer usage, and the AMI data indicated that they had much less of a peaking factor or peaking factors than did the single family class, for example. So the allocation of the cost was less to that group. So I guess in answering to the question, we could potentially see if you would have more multifamily customers within that class, we could potentially see that cost allocation changing because of their peaking characteristics, as we would see in others as they increased or decreased. Again, everything based on proportional cost allocation and AMI data. So I hope that answers the question.
Yes, I don't see Miriam on our attendee list anymore, or I'd unmute her. But I believe David Rice did have a question, and David, you are unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so with regards to single family sewer rates assume that all water used above 12,000 gallons per month is for outdoor use. And within the rate structure, water above 12,000 gallons is charged at 3 different rate tiers. I'm curious the rationale for having 3 different rate tiers for exterior or outdoor water use for single family, whereas for landscape there is a single rate. And so I'm curious what's the rationale for not having rate tiers in landscape? So why is it in single family and not in landscape?
Thanks for that question, David. I appreciate that. And I'll ask Steve White to also chime in as I go, but I'll take a first shot at that. This is something that actually did come up in our stakeholder meetings several times, where we discussed, of course, the tier structure within the single family class. And of course, tier structures are generally put into place where you've got similar groupings of characteristics that you can then you can accomplish further cost allocation based on the analysis within those groups. Landscaping and the landscaping class is definitely a candidate for that at some point in the future. It's not something we could get into in this particular rate study, but it did come up by the stakeholders who basically had the same feedback that you're providing, which is, we see that there's some similarities there. You could make that comparison, and maybe that's something that potentially we want to look into in the longer term. The issue becomes that we have, in certain cases, the choice to either create tier structures within a class or to create different classes. There's an administrative cost to that. There's a cost associated with basically administering a program where you've got a very small number of customers versus a very large class like single family residential. But basically, you're correct. That is definitely a candidate for future consideration and something we'll have to analyze, and it is on our list for our next rate study, because we know that that's we're seeing those peaking factors. We know that there are costs associated with that in the landscape class, and it is something that we could potentially refine further so we could actually see what the allocation within that group is. But it's definitely a point well taken, and something that we definitely will put on our list for moving forward. So Steve, did you want to add anything to that?
Sure, Terry. Thank you. You're absolutely correct, Terry, and your response. I think the only thing I would add to that is when you look at landscape usage, it does have quite a bit of peaking, but there's when you look at the other customer classifications that are not single family, they have very customer specific usage types. So given that the volume disparity between, for instance, a city park or high school where they have a lot of outdoor fields versus some smaller landscape meters that are, maybe drip irrigation, watering, desert adaptive plants, creating tiers and that are accurate to the demand characteristics of each customer on such a large scale of volume differences between the customers within the landscape customer class becomes difficult, but it's definitely something, as Terry said, that we will investigate further in our next rate study to evaluate if we can accurately divide that up into reasonable tiers that will cost recover, that we have an allocation of costs between those customers as well, similar to the single family customer class.
I guess I'm wondering why that same difference doesn't exist in the single family residential class, and that there's people that have, say, a half-acre lot or even a quarter-acre lot. Depending on what size your lot is, your watering peaking factor is essentially individually is the same, in that if you had the same type of landscape, but you're penalized by having more landscape in the single family usage class or user class, as opposed to a landscape user class, right?
David, I would respond to that just by saying that how we allocate our pricing to each individual tier. And what I mean by that is how we're allocating our peaking cost association, our maximum day and our peak hour costs to each tier is proportional to the peaking factors, the ratios, as Terry was going through in the presentation today, that maximum day and peak hour within each tier that we've observed over the last 3 years. We looked at 2017, 2018, and 2019 calendar years, observed the peaking factors that we see from the minimum month and the maximum month of each one of those years, averaged those, and applied them, allocated the cost of maximum day and peak hour cost to those tiers proportionally. And that includes tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, and tier 5. Every single tier within the single family customer class pays maximum day and peak hour costs within that rate structure proportionally to the use characteristics that we've observed in our billing data and our AMI data.
Yeah, so I mean, that's fine. I guess that's fine. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Thank you, David.
We have another question from Tom in the audience. How does this relate to Tempe having enough water in the future? I hear cost and therefore money, but not water, as in its use and having enough. Shouldn't it be having enough basis rather than cost basis?
Thank you for that question as well. That's a question that also has come up a couple of times, and I'll take a shot at that. Yes, certainly part of our cost that we recover is for water resources, but it's also for water efficiency efforts, water conservation, and all those things that go into that. It also plays into our sort of resiliency efforts, what we're doing for planning purposes in the future, making sure that not only do we have sufficient resources, should we face any sort of a shortage, maybe there's a drought condition that would occur in the short term that we would have to be able to address and still be able to provide service, but also to be able to provide the service consistently and throughout the system from a variety of sources. So, all systems are not 100% efficient where you can get all water from various sources to all locations at the same level that you need to at all times. So we make a lot of efforts to make sure we have, for example, we primarily use surface water. We treat surface water and we distribute that water to our customers. We also use well water, and we use that on some level of frequency, but we can't get necessarily the same volume of well water at all times to all areas. So we also are investing in infrastructure, and our CIP reflects that, where we're looking at well location and siting. We're making sure that we have redundancy where we need it. We make sure that our system is sized appropriately to be able to do that, as I mentioned. But we're also looking at other opportunities for water resources, and we're investing in the potential of groundwater and recovery of water and potential use of reclaimed water in certain areas where we can have other benefits from a groundwater credit standpoint. We're always looking at a variety of that. So all of that is sort of built into the equation of managing a utility. So it's very much part of this. It's an excellent question, but we have a very strong water portfolio within the city of Tempe. It's very actively managed by this utility and our staff, and we have a significant support from council in terms of doing all of the necessary steps to make sure we're in a very strong position moving forward, whether it be for the basic provision of service to our customers or how it's viewed from an economic development standpoint. But all of those being said, we're in a very strong position relative to our water resources and portfolio moving forward in the future.
And Tom, you're unmuted if you'd like to have a follow-up question.
No, I think that answers it. I'm fairly new to the issue. That's why I wanted to be on this webinar. And I'm fairly ignorant of what's going on in the background to make sure we do have enough water. So I thank you for the answer. And I'll try to keep my interest up and follow these webinars and all your community outreach. And I'll keep giving my feedback. But let me just do a real wild question. Given Arizona's incoming residents from all over the place, what about this? I doubt it would work, but what about a pipeline from, say, 10,000 Lakes, Minnesota to Arizona? I mean, we do gas. What? I don't know. Just a wild idea.
Yeah.
You don't have to respond, but
I can give you a brief response. It's not really that wild of an idea, and it's actually been done on smaller scales in different parts of the country where they found themselves. It's interesting. They're not necessarily in desert areas, but they found themselves in situations where they needed to move large volumes of water to different parts of the country. And again, this has kind of been throughout the history of our country, but our version of it here in Arizona, of course, is the Salt River Project and then the Central Arizona Project going back, decades before. But those types of considerations have been used in, I think, Texas and New Mexico recently did a version of a very extensive pipeline system, and others have considered that. Also, people have looked at, desalination facilities and such for seawater. But I'll say that we're fortunate in that we have a very active water management industry in Arizona. Obviously, water is our basic source of everything we're doing here. So going back, beyond 100 years, there was a lot of really effective and really well-supported planning that took place. We're very fortunate to have both the SRP system and the CAP system as our primary sources of water. They're very actively managed, both of them. CAP, of course, being much larger scale in terms of that, but in Tempe specifically, we're less dependent on that. But we have the SRP system that, again, is very well managed and maintained in terms of the watershed, the facilities, the structures, and so forth. But also on the CAP side, which you may read about, there's a lot of discussion and planning and cooperation about keeping water in Lake Mead, for example, and keeping water from the watershed in those lakes and preserving so that we have water moving forward as we move through drought cycles and such. So everything you're describing is really not that wild of an idea, but I think for us in Arizona and specifically in Tempe, we're not at the point where that type of thing is being seriously considered in terms of that, but there are a lot of different alternatives that are always being looked at in terms of water, and not only what additional sources we can develop, but how we can conserve and be efficient with our usage as to not draw on what we have currently. So I appreciate that question, Tom, and your involvement is very much appreciated.
Thank you.
I believe David had another question regarding fire protection demands. David, you are unmuted.
Okay, yeah, I guess out of curiosity, how do fire protection demands and requirements, how are they apportioned to different rate classes? I noticed there's something that's kind of in the appendix of the 2017 rate study. I was curious if you could explain how that is done, or if it is apportioned in any way, or it affects really any cost.
Sure, David, thank you for your question. This is Stephen White. As far as fire protection goes, we do have separate meter fees. So the cost recovery for that is in the monthly service fee based on meter size. So there are some classifications that do have fire protection that have a different meter fee associated with them. So that's where that is captured at. We call them monthly service fee with an additional sprinkler fee. Does that answer your question, David?
I guess it seems like fire protection requires some large distribution ability to distribute large amounts of water to all parts of the city, regardless of whether a multifamily or a commercial building or different residential lots use a lot of water. And I'm wondering if that is shows up at all in the rate, other than, I guess, how you described.
Let me go back and take a look at that, and I'll respond to your question at a later time. At this point in time, I don't have that information in front of me, but I'd be happy to research that and provide you with a proper explanation.
Okay, thanks.
Does anyone else have any questions? Not seeing any currently in the chat.
Laura, this is Steve White. Did we receive any comment forms prior to the meeting?
Steve, we did. Would you like me to read the one we have from Gary? Hang on, I have to pull it up again. It's a little bit long, so bear with me. Okay, and I'm reading this on my phone, so. This question follows up on material that I have previously submitted via email. In reviewing the criteria that guide water rate studies, there are two glaring omissions. These are, one, the impact of rising water rates on those with fixed incomes, and number two, the very real possibility that rates have reached a threshold beyond which the City of Tempe will see severe deterioration in the ability of homeowners to maintain their existing yards. This is especially impactful on those with large lots and no access to irrigation water. Is it accurate to conclude that the council does not care about and will not consider these issues?
Thanks for that question, Gary. I appreciate that. Let me try to answer it this way. I would say that not speaking on behalf of council, but I guess I can just speak from my perspective that, I believe that we all care about all of the issues that impact our customers. We try our best to follow certain methodologies that are, again, we talk a lot about proportionality, but really what it comes down to is to try to do things in a way that's systematic and following a methodology that can be defended in terms of, I don't mean just legally defended, but we can stand behind our process. We can stand behind it and say, while being both sensitive to costs and the impact of rate increases, the costs of providing water services generally don't decrease. And that's typically because of, as I mentioned in the presentation, we see kind of a higher level of typical inflationary costs than we might see in the rest of the economy. Again, I think, and again, not speaking on behalf of our elected officials, but I can say that we put a strong component of considering those with lower incomes, fixed incomes, if you will, however that might be described. And I think we always face that, as do other utilities for that matter. Electric utilities, gas utilities, others face that same type of pressure and consideration as we figure out how do we recover costs? How do we do this in terms of having this be truly proportional, and how do we base these charges on what it actually takes to provide the water? I think the important part is that there is a reality to how much our water costs. We try to show the value of our water and its relative cost versus other areas and what we do, and we try to have programs in place that help customers become as efficient as they can. The city council and the city itself dedicates significant resources to outreach efforts and education and efficiency and our own sorts of efficiency efforts within the utility to try to make sure we're controlling costs to the extent possible. But there's a financial reality in being able to provide that amount of water that we have to recover because we are an enterprise fund. We're self-sufficient, and we have to develop a method to do that. So the question you're asking is somewhat outside the scope of what we do in a water rate study, but I'll assure you that our methodology that we follow is in no way arbitrary. It's very specific, and we follow industry best practices for a reason, because we have to be able to say that to the people on this call and the rest of the community and our elected officials, and say we're following a method that you can rest assured is a proportional method, a method that really truly based on what it costs to provide the service at the level that it's required, and to have the high quality water and have this water available when it's demanded and that sort of thing. So I know that's sort of a indirect answer to your question, but it's our sort of basis for what we do. So I hope that somewhat helps.
And Gary, you're unmuted if you did have any kind of a follow-up question.
I'm unmuted.
We can hear you, Gary.
Okay. Well, the what you didn't speak to directly, but first of all, let me say it seems like you've been very conscientious in looking at this, and I'm impressed with the thoroughness and thoughtfulness of what you've just presented. Sometimes there are unintended consequences or unanticipated consequences from actions. And the one that I don't think you spoke to really is what the city of Tempe looks like aesthetically. Just speaking of my own neighborhood, which is Corona del Sol Estates, where there are 1/3 and 1/2 acre lots, the water rates, I believe, have been responsible for a browning of the community. As I drive around what used to be a place filled with big trees and green lawns, now there are dead trees, dead plants, and brown lawns. And some people are switching to some form of desert landscaping, and maybe that's what we all have to do. But it certainly, as rates go up, Tempe is going to become a browner city in terms of its vegetation. And maybe that's just the way it is. But I guess I just wanted to call the council's attention to the fact that that's perhaps an unintended consequence of the price of water continuing to go up. Anyway, coming back to where I started, I think you're doing a very good job in your analysis, and the presentation was straightforward and clear. And it seems to me that anybody should be able to understand why you're doing what you're doing.
Thank you for that, Gary. We appreciate that very much. And I'll just sort of reiterate what I mentioned at the beginning, which is, you know, there are some questions that are difficult for us to answer from a utility perspective. And but I will say that the one of the main purposes of this outreach, not only to be able to get feedback, is so that we understand and hopefully can help people understand our process that we go through, but also our city council genuinely wants to hear this type of feedback, whether it's something we can answer or not. They want to know what the community's thoughts, or even, you know, individuals within the community's thoughts are. They genuinely care, and they want to make informed decisions, and, you know, they have to make difficult decisions about certain things. So, you know, things like you're pointing out where there's an unintended consequence potentially, or even if there's a perception of something like that, I think our council would want to know that. So I'll let everyone know on this call, or anyone listening to this, is that we will provide that feedback to council as we're discussing it here. This will be provided in basically a version of a transcription that they'll get to see, and so they can get all the information and all of the feedback as we are, and they can make an informed decision. So thank you for that.
Yeah, could I add one more thing?
Yes, sir.
I would be happy to provide information to the council and to the people on the water management aspect of the city. If you've read some of my emails, I've really tried to understand my water use and have more data than most people. I have meters downstream from the city meter, so I can see exactly what's going to landscaping, exactly what's going into my swimming pool, exactly what's going into the house, and therefore will become wastewater. And so I really have a good handle on my water use, and I have the water to my landscaping sorted out. So if there's a leak, I can track it down very quickly by just turning off this valve or that valve. Anyway, I have over tried to provide information as I could to your personnel. For example, John Woods was interested in how much swimming pools lose per day. I actually measured mine, and this summer during July when it was really hot, I was losing 78 gallons a day to evaporation. So that's just a little piece of information, but it might be useful as people think about their use of water and what adding a pool is going to do to that.
Right.
Anyway, my offer stands. I'll be happy to visit with anybody about any of these issues. I have a lot of data collected over many years.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
This is Tom, if I'm unmuted still.
Yes, sir.
I have a question. The landscaping indicated in the charts, what is that? Is that the city's cost of landscaping, therefore parks and right-of-ways and stuff like that? Or is there some private component in that some way?
I'll let Steve take that one, but I believe what we represent as landscaping as a customer class is where we have a separate landscaping meter for that usage. So that it could be anything from an individual to a business to a facility. But if they've got an individual landscaping meter that's dedicated to that resource, this is the water volume, the meter water volume within that certain classification of meters. Steve, I might not be representing that fully, but.
Terry, you're absolutely correct. Just a few examples, any common areas, HOAs, obviously city, but it's both public and private. So we have approximately 1,600 customers in that landscape that have landscape meters or that are in the landscape classification.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? This is Ann Till. Hello?
Hello.
Oh, I just wanted, I posted a note about, somebody mentioned Browning Yards, but I don't know if I know you guys have Tina who's done some focus on low water use habitat gardening, but I'm actually working an effort with another gentleman that lives in the city to do a Keep Tempe Beautiful chapter. And so, we're hoping to focus on, neighborhoods, doing more low water use plantings. My yard itself has no grass in it, and it's full of blooms right now, and it's all desert habitat, purples, reds, so I've got different varieties of birds that live. My neighbor has a great big mesquite tree, so it's like a little native habitat, and I've got a couple hopefully low water use water features that attract that, so it makes it a real peaceful, not brown, but low water use environment. Yeah, and low maintenance too. So I don't know if there's people that we should be talking with. I know the other person's talked with a bunch of the council about that, but we're hoping to figure out a way to encourage that and hopefully reduce people's water bills at the same time. Anyways, I just gonna mention that people just kind of fail to forget that it doesn't always take water to have a beautiful yard, and grass isn't the only yard option. So
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Ann. I appreciate that. Laura, do we have any other?
I am not seeing any further questions. Anyone in the attendee list want to speak up now? I can unmute you.
One last question. This is Tom. The community groups meeting that you had in one chart,
Yes, sir.
is that just the leadership of each neighborhood association, or are you visiting some way each neighborhood association, or
Yeah,
what does that mean?
sure. This year we did it a little differently, as well as you're participating in. This year is a bit unique. We're doing almost everything virtually. So in previous rate studies, the utility has done more, kind of leaned more toward doing HOAs and those groups, but we thought that would be a little challenging. So that's why this year we also decided to do the stakeholder group. We formulated the community stakeholder group, which was 10 individuals, representative of, various of the customer classes, but also several of those were, HOA presidents, active members in their local neighborhood. We had business leaders and we had representatives from all various different groups, businesses and such. We had the first public meeting was in this format where we did basically an introduction of the rate study process and how we would be doing that. Of course, council meetings and such that are available to the public to participate and review. But the others are the commissions, and we did one commission meeting yesterday. That's the Sustainability Commission. And then we've got the second one, which is the Neighborhood Advisory. And maybe I can ask Laura or Steve to maybe answer the question more directly as to who comprises the Neighborhood Advisory Commission.
Sure. The commission is, I don't have an exact number for you, but I believe, let's say roughly 12 to 15 members. And they do come from all throughout Tempe. There's representation from every zip code. And so they're just regular citizens that have expressed an interest in, issues like this and providing their input. So yeah, they'll be, you guys will be talking to them on Wednesday next week, I believe.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Anyone else?
Well, this is Gary again. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Just so you know, I submitted 2 questions on that showed up on my Q&A, but you haven't acknowledged them. One was actually just an observation. Somebody asked about wastewater rates. I have looked at that quite a bit, and with people with large landscaping usage, what you find is that wastewater production stays constant throughout the year. Landscape water use changes dramatically, and so there's really no relationship between the two, and yet the city bills based on a relationship, assuming that a certain part of the total water use is wastewater. And it turns out for large people with large landscaping uses, it just doesn't hold at all, and you end up paying way more than you really ought to pay. I think it's capped at 12,000 or something. I've measured mine and it's never 4. It's usually between 3,000 and 4,000. But I pay for 12,000 every month because that's supposed to be a good deal, I guess. And there's really no easy way to measure it. I mean, there's no easy way to measure what's going into the wastewater. I estimate it by what's coming into the house. If I know what's coming into the house, that's pretty much going to be my wastewater production.
Can I ask a question on that? This is Ann Till again. Isn't the fee for the wastewater itself though capped altogether? Because I kind of, since I have my desert habitat, but I have a lot of fruit trees too. So I use water for that. So I was kind of looking into a separate meter, but when I evaluated that, they told me that, it was significantly less if I, you know, it wasn't a huge amount, the wastewater amount. It didn't seem like, but I'm not really sure because it's been a while since I looked into that, but.
I think, just speaking as another ratepayer, it's not a lot, no. The, and it would probably be cost prohibitive for the city to try to figure out a way any way to bill it other than a percent of the total use.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. What I've found is a lot of people aren't aware that your wastewater rate is, you know, set up based on your bill in January, February, and March, you know, and it's weird because my bills switch to later in the month, so March kind of gets me irritated because I have to use more water in March for landscape. I wish it was December, January, and February for the billing because those are the months when I use the least water. So I don't know if that's something you could consider. I had Tina out to look at my house or, you know, go over my water usage, and it was pretty low considering what I have in my yard. You know, as far as fruit trees, I have like 52 fruit trees. So, and I have a small lot though, so it's kind of, you know, not one of those situations where I have a large lot, but you know, if considering that my water bill somehow a couple years ago, the billing date moved from like the beginning of the month to the end of the month. So now that March is the end of the month, that kind of makes a difference. I don't know if everybody else's bill moved, but you know, either way, I actually, as much as I don't water much at all in those months. I mean, if it rains, I don't even water. So, but my water rate, I still get, you know, I still end up, I don't know why, even when I had no irrigation, you know, I was still up and I don't have any leaks. So I still, more than what the other guy was saying, he said he used 4,000, but mine's always been over 6, you know, even when I had no irrigation system in my yard or hand watering. So anyways, comments, sorry.
No, that's good. That's good discussion. Steve, I was going to ask if anything wasn't captured in that discussion in terms of how the wastewater calculations are made and when. Is there anything to add to that for the good of the group?
Thank you, Terry. And I certainly appreciate Gary and Ann's comments on this. I will say that comparing our single-family wastewater rate compared to our neighboring valley cities, I believe we have one of the most customer-centric and most accurate ways of charging using a winter average, as Ann and Gary were talking about. But we also take that a step further, and we only bill single-family residents 70% of their winter average. Beyond that, we're the only city in the valley that caps that at 12,000 gallons. And I very much appreciate the fact that, you know, Gary is measuring his own indoor water use, but that's a very cost prohibitive process for any city to undertake, and it would defeat the purpose, if you will, if we or any other city were to go to that level of sub metering. But our single family rates at $1.84 and at 70% of winter average, and the fact that we cap it so we're not penalizing any customers that use a lot of outdoor water use in the wintertime during that 3-month average period, I think is a significant step forward and provides as much accuracy as we possibly can in capturing what the return flow is from our single family customers.
Yeah, I felt like when I looked into the getting a dedicated line, which was just cost prohibitive anyways, because it was like $4,000 or $5,000, and even over time there was no return. But my analysis, you know, talking to Tina and another person at the water management in your group, led me to believe that you know, it wasn't a huge charge for the wastewater, if that's what I recall. It's been a year now since I did that, but the only thing that might be nice, and I don't know if you guys can consider it, is to look at when people are billed and see if maybe there might, you know, be a measurement in there that makes a difference, you know. that, maybe going to December, January, February, if you're billed later in the month, or just something to consider. I don't know how much difference it even would make, on an individual resident since you cap it. So.
We appreciate that.
Anybody else before we wrap it up here? Not seeing anything in the chat or in the questions.
Okay. Then I'll just let me take 1 minute of your time just to thank everyone again for their participation in not only today's webinar, but also the process in general. I know that, while some of you mentioned being new to it, several of you are very familiar with our water utility and our rates and fees and how we recover costs and that sort of thing. But it's very important to us to have your input and to have these questions and discussions with our community. And it's also very important to our city leadership and city council as well. So your involvement helps to make this a better process. And we always want to do the best we possibly can to make this very accurate and very proportional and very reflective of what the community needs, and also to be able to provide that service in a very consistent manner. So I'll just say one more plug for the survey that is on the utility rate study webpage on tempe.gov. I believe it's in the chat. I don't know if Laura, if you wanted to share the actual web address any other way, but if you could possibly fill out a survey, that would be very helpful to our city council as we collect all of this feedback and input and provide it to them. But that would be a helpful tool for them to be able to, again, as I mentioned, make as informed a decision as they can. So thank you again for your time and participation today.
Thank you, everybody.